Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're three Black moms.
Hi, I guess I'm starting today. Stop me if you've heard this before. You are in a new job and people treat you a little, oh, funny. The microaggressions, someone wants to touch your hair. Someone asks you something about how often do you do your hair, if it's yours. They want to know where you're from, or they tell you that you speak really, really well, or they do all other kind of very strange questioning that they wouldn't question someone else. Chances are you are their first Black person and you are the only one. And we want to talk today a little bit about being the only one. I know at my very first job. Now, granted, I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution, Kansas State, because I knew that in my field of journalism, I was probably going to be in the minority in any newsroom that I went into. Well, my first job out of college, I wasn't just the only one in the newsroom. I was the only one in the city. I was the only one in about 3 counties. So, talk about your isolation. Talk about the very strange looks you would get, people wanting to know who you were, um, people saying, not necessarily overtly racist things, but not knowing how to respond. And maybe you're not even their first one, but they still have to come up to you and tell you about the last Black person that they met. And usually the story has nothing to do with the person being Black. They just want to let you know that they knew someone Black at some point. So, the thing is even though we are still the global majority, a lot of our children are still going to experience that first Black, only one, microaggression, racism kind of thing. So we want to talk to you about how we handled our first Black experience. Barbara?
Girl, I'm going to tell you a really funny story that happened back when I was in college. I think one of the fraternities, I think it was Q Sci Phi, which is a Black fraternity.
Omega Psi Phi.
Omega Psi Phi
Yeah.
had scheduled a skating party at the local skating rink in Peoria. And really, it was an excellent, fun event. I had put up posters advertising it all over the building that I lived in my dorm, in the student center, and everywhere. Now, this was not an exclusive skating party. It was open to anyone. But amazingly, there were mostly African Americans who were here. And some of my friends who were white showed up. And they were kind of disconcerted because maybe out of several dozen Black skaters, there was only 3 of them. And my friend, I remember her name was Christy, and she was one of those girls that was a little bit snooty anyway already. And she came up to me and said, "I feel like a Black Tootsie Roll." And I thought, what a funny thing to say. And I'm thinking, now that's interesting that you would say that, because I've been in so many situations where I really have been the Black Tootsie Roll and everybody else has been white. And I think that as a young person, when our neighborhood first integrated Fanger High School on the South Side, a lot of us were in classrooms where we were the only one. Maybe you were the only Black student in honors English, honors physics, honors geometry. And it was kind of a weird feeling. I mean, if you were self-possessed and pretty much could handle yourself, you never made it be a big deal. But like Cheryl said, people who were not used to being around anyone else except their own homogenous group did not know how to integrate well without sounding like they were ignorant. And you found yourself having to educate a whole population of people that had been isolated from you. You lived in your neighborhood, they lived in their neighborhood. And then when we came together, kind of the mix, they like to say that Chicago is this very diverse city, but in many areas, there was not that diversity. There were strict lines where people lived, and you didn't really go across those lines. And that brings up the whole thing of redlining and racial discrimination in housing and workplace. And you know something interesting? Last night, my husband and I were up late watching a 1947 movie with Gregory Peck called A Gentleman's Agreement. I don't know if you've seen this movie, but it is a story of Gregory Peck going undercover as a Jewish man.
Oh.
And because they were doing articles, they had a whole series they were doing on anti-Semitism. And he went undercover. And the movie, even though it's 1947, it was rated PG because they did not bleep out any of the racial Jewish slurs. And I'm telling you, you were taken aback because as soon as people found out that he was Jewish, he really was a Gentile, but he was undercover. He was treated badly. It was very subtle. He and his bride-to-be had booked a place in a hotel for their honeymoon. And when he comes in to make sure that everything is okay, and then he tells them, "Oh, my name is Greenberg, not Green," all of a sudden there was no room because they had a thing they called restrictions. That was code for no Jews in here.
Wow.
So Black people are not the only ones who've been in situations where they have been isolated, because if the majority, if the dominant culture is the one that is in charge, you find yourself in a position to have to acquiesce a lot to discriminatory behaviors because you're trying to fit in. You don't want to give up your identity, but still you feel a little bit put out that these people that you're working with or living around or traveling with, they don't know anything about you. You know everything about them and they know nothing about you. What does that say?
Well, I never had that experience until I went away to college. We grew up in the, I won't even say predominantly Black community, but all Black community in Maple Park. I think the only
white interracial couples.
The only that's what I was about to say. The only whites that were there were the ones that were part of an interracial couple, and that was a few scattered here and there. But we didn't have an experience of being, quote, minorities growing up. So when I went away to the University of Nebraska, I realized I was a lot of people's first Black. It was amusing on the one hand, but on the other hand, it was kind of angrifying because, I was, I grew up kind of on the heels of the 60s movement. I was a child and Dr. King was assassinated and everything. And then you had a lot of the Black Power movement. I was just, early teens, teenagers and all that sort of thing. I remember reading the book Malcolm X. I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And so that was my kind of introduction to militancy and all that sort of thing. But I didn't really have anywhere to put it because there were no white people. So there was no one to fight against in a sense of it being in our environment where I had to deal with racism in my life. But then I went away to college, and being the only Black in pretty much all of my classes, every now and then there'd be maybe one or two, and then a few in the dorm. And of course, when you go to a predominantly white institution, what is it? They actually have a acronym for the
PWI.
PWI. Yeah, they actually have an initial for it now. So I went to a PWI instead of an HBCU. I went to a PWI, and my first roommate, she was white, and my first day there, she took me to a party that I think it must have been a Labor Day weekend party or something like that. So she took me to a party so I could meet all her friends because they wanted to meet her new roommate from Chicago. And I guess they kind of figured, oh, she must be black, and so that was a new experience for them. It was definitely a cultural experience for me. I mean, they sitting around their overalls and barefooted with a kegger of beer, and I'm like, okay, this is different. They were nice, but it was a different cultural thing. And you know how our parties are. Our parties are, the dance and all of that, and we got the soul music. Wasn't none of that. So just drink your beer and hey, drink your beer. Okay, this is a party. Okay, well,
yes.
You say so. I mean, I'm just trying to accept whatever cultural thing I'm learning. But then in the classroom, a lot of the professors would say things that let me know they had stereotypical thoughts. Like, because I'm one of them students that raise your hand all the time. I want you to know I know stuff, And, afterwards they'd say things to me like, you're very articulate.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me.
Expression.
And what else were you expecting? I'm in college. Of course I'm articulate. But it was like a surprise, and I realized that they had these thoughts. And I think maybe even for some of my professors, maybe I might have been their first black. I remember the first theater class I had, and I was only black in there. And we were doing scenes from various films. And what was that black film they wanted me to they wanted me to play the black person. It was a member of the wedding or something like that. One of the old black films.
Yes.
And one of the mammy characters.
Yes.
It's so racist. But at the time, you pretty much do whatever you're asked because you're a student, But I ran into a friend of mine who had taken she was black and she had taken that class the semester before. And she said, did he try to make you play that black character? And I'm like, yeah. And he does that to all the black students. I'm like, oh, really? You mean y'all can't find nothing else but something stereotypically black,
Yes.
So it's that sort of thing. And then we had a lot of incidences where racial issues came up. And then I started working for the newspaper, the Daily Nebraskan. And they said, well, we want to make sure we have you cover the minority news. And I'm like, okay, what is minority news? Okay. So I knew what they meant, but it was kind of like, you got to be the voice for the black people because we don't really understand you people. And you almost don't know if you should be offended or if you should realize they're really trying,
Or this is an opportunity to educate a large number of people who have lived all their lives in isolation themselves from other people of color. And this isn't just about Black people, because I have friends who have been different Asian groups. I remember one girlfriend, her name was Z. She spelled it X-I, and she was Hmong. And she remembers, we were having some discussion, and she remembers at some point in her young life, maybe it was middle school, and because of the neighborhood where she lived, she recognized, I'm not white. I'm not white, and it was like suddenly being able to identify with her own people, her own culture, because her family was the only one in the neighborhood. And she went on a search to find many of her own people in other places to befriend them. And this is before social media, Facebook, any of those things. So she had to go to the library and actually do some serious hands-on research to find people like her, because one of the problems with being isolated, you start feeling like there's a loss of your real self as you try to become the people that you're around. It becomes exhausting to have to educate people because
Yes.
of their own ignorance.
But you know
Yes.
what? You know what I observed though, because I also met a lot of Black people, a lot of students in Nebraska. They had all their life been that only one. So culturally, they really grew up as white people, and
Yes.
they really didn't know what it meant to be Black, other than to be discriminated against, look different. But they didn't really have a cultural reference. And what I'm learning, even now, being around a lot of different Black people from all around the world, culturally, we're very American, because when you interact with Black people who are from Africa, yeah, there's some undercurrents of some similarities, but then there's some major cultural differences. So there's the cultural identity that you have of how you grew up, and the memories that you have, everything from the food to the music to the politics. That's your experience. And the way you look, it does not define who you are on the inside. Your experience defines who you are on the inside. It was very difficult for a lot of those Black students to feel comfortable around Black people if they grown up as a white person in Black skin, because that's really what they were. And
that's the way they,
That
even
was
though they didn't perceive themselves, it's like the people say, "Oh, I don't see color." Yeah, the heck you don't, because you're the first one when the lights go off says, "Oh, I can't see you in the dark." Well, if you
No, you don't get to say those kind of jokes.
yeah, you don't say those kind of stupid things that you
They
think
get a tan and say, "Oh, I'm as dark as you."
I know, right?
I pulled you over.
Yes,
Oh.
exactly. They're not going. The first thing they do, they got to run up to you when they get off the beach and put their arm against yours. By the way, don't do that. Don't do that.
I hope people are still not doing that. I know they do that when you're like college age and 20s.
No, they still do that. They still do that. They still have to ask you about your hair. I actually had someone a couple weeks ago ask me if this was all my hair, and I said, "Whose else's would it be?"
Well,
weaves, and then she didn't even have an answer for that, because I think she realized how stupid that sounded. Is that your hair?
Even if I bought it, it's mine.
Even if I bought it, which I didn't, but even if I bought it, it would still be mine.
Right. You got the price tag for it. It's still mine.
I want to bring up what Barbara said just recently, because it is exhausting. Now, I'm going to use, and granted, I love this man, John Oliver. We just saw him last week. But John Oliver did a thing on Black hair a couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year. And I'm going to use it in my reporting issues of diversity class, because at the very end, people say, "Okay, we're going to tell you what you need to know. Google it." And that's the thing, is that it is so exhausting to have to answer questions that are readily available to you. We are not there for your edification so that you can feel good, or the tears when you say something that is offensive, and then we have to comfort you because you feel bad, and it's really hard. Like I said, there are times that you have to really speak out. But what I want to tell our children is, you are qualified to be in every space that you are in.
Right.
So if you find yourself to be the only one, push back when someone says, "Oh, affirmative action is the reason why you're here." Affirmative action is a way of giving people who are probably more than qualified the space and the opportunity that you got just by the nature of you being white. And that's what we need to understand about affirmative action first, is that they're not just grabbing anyone off the street and saying, "Okay, you're Black, you're a janitor, but you can be CEO." No, they're asking the woman who has done the business work and has done these things, and they're asking her because she is more than qualified.
And they're needing to equalize
and it's
the workplace.
So for one thing, you are You are
More than
You're
qualified.
more than qualified to be there. Don't even subscribe to that whole imposter syndrome. We are not imposters. We are not a minority. We are part of the global majority. Always think of yourself as that. And when you get tired of being the education, now you should speak up when someone says something, because there's a lot of stories that get written that are wrong. There are a lot of advertising that is blatantly racist. And yeah, you being in the room doesn't mean that you're going to sit around and say, yeah, that's okay. You are in the room so you can say, you know what, that's not okay.
Yeah,
And then
don't
when
say
they
it
go
like
and do it anyway, you can say, see, I told you it wasn't okay. Now, maybe next time you'll listen to me, because
Mhm.
I do have this lived experience that you do not.
Yeah.
Realize that if you are in the room, because I always have students that say, well, these things wouldn't happen if we had more people or more women in the room. Yes, but if you're in the room just to be a yes person,
Then
then
what
you're
good
not.
are you?
You know, you are there because you have your lived experience. Use that and push back. Be willing to push back, but don't always feel like you are, and it is exhausting to be Black sometimes, because everybody's expecting, especially Black women, we're supposed to save the world, but they don't listen to us, and they did it. They still want us to save the world. Yeah, if you want to save us to save the world, get out of the way and let us do it. But but the thing is that I want our children to know that uh, being the only one doesn't mean that you have to assimilate or try to make people like you or respect you. That's on them. You know what? Whatever their racial or racist feelings are, that is their problem. And feel free to push back. As the only Black person in 3 counties, there are plenty of times I had to kind of check people.
Well, sometimes you have to do that, but we have to raise our children so that they have the confidence to do that. And
Absolutely.
that means really being aware of their childhood experiences early on, making sure that you're not in the name of making sure they go to so-called better schools, subjecting them to repeated racism, and you not
Right.
standing
And
up
trauma.
and rare trauma, and you not standing up and fighting for them, or making sure that they don't have those experiences where they're always being made to feel like there's something wrong with them. You have to make sure that they have culturally affirming experiences early in their lives, no matter where you're living. I think about that well, that show This Is Us, when you're trying to figure out how to and then he talked about even the Black character who was raised as triplets in a family where there's a white son and daughter, and then him as a Black son, and they never knew that he felt discriminated against until it came up when they were adults. But then he just went over all the times he was trying to find his Blackness, and even the father trying to figure out, well, how can I expose him to more Black males, and then the mother feeling like she's being maybe looked down on by the Black women, like she didn't know how to mother him properly, all of the defensiveness and everything. But these are real things.
And that was a very good show in pointing that out. There are a lot of Black groups that, well, I remember one in Chicago, one of the Chicago suburbs. It was called Parents of Black Children. And there were all kinds of parents. I can't think right now. It was one of those large mega churches out in the suburbs of Chicago, where they met once a month as parents of Black children. Many of these people were mixed race couples. Some of them were white couples that had adopted Black children, and they had to interact with each other. These parents had to learn how to become culturally indoctrinated in the culture of their Black child, so that their Black child would not grow up feeling weird because their parents were white. And so by them having Black parents that were also involved in this group, it was like a small group that just gradually grew larger. And they had adoption agency people that had you take a special test before you could actually adopt a child of another race, so that you could be aware first of your own prejudices and also of the prejudices that your child was going to run into by being your child. And so the opportunity for learning and being educated is no small thing. If you are wanting to, you can educate yourself. You don't have to depend on your one Black friend to tell you everything about all the Black people of every nation in the world, because your one Black friend doesn't know every single thing in the world. If you want to know those things, do research. Learn how to be a friend and stop treating your person of color as an other. Once you can see your friend or your colleague as someone like you, you don't say the stupid stuff that I have heard.
But you know what? Also, well, I was just going to say, you know what Barbara said about the film about the guy being Jewish. Because I have an associate who grew up Jewish, and you know, you have no idea, because we grew up in a totally predominantly Black community. We don't even know what the other ethnicities go through in the interdiscrimination with that.
Right.
And you know, we know what it's like to be the only Black, but what if you're the only Asian, the only Jewish person?
That's what I wanted to say, because there are a lot of Asian children who have been adopted by white families, and they also, and that, you know, that maybe that's something we should explore at another time, is about interracial adoption, because they grow up usually in predominantly white environments, and then they feel that loss of their own identity, because everybody likes these kids, and people seem to think, oh, kids are kids, and you know what, they're not. I'm sorry, but they're not. You know what, there is, because of the racism of this country, there are cultural differences, and there are cultural differences even when there aren't, even if there isn't racism. And you have to have that child understand that, no, you're not going to grow up and one day be white just like your parents. You know, you have to understand, you have to teach that child pride in who they are. And that's what a lot of people are missing, because white people don't have to think about being white every single day, because they think of themselves as the norm and everybody else as the other. So we have to make sure that we are not othering ourselves, that we are in those places, and that, you know, we are not treated as the other. We have to push back when people say, well, you know, normal people do this. Well, I'm normal too.
Right. And it's normal for me to do what I'm doing.
Yes.
Right. We got to go. But we do want you all, if you are having that experience, or if your child is having that experience of being the only one, like you're just saying, Cheryl, do not ever, 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 ever give your child the impression that anybody else is more normal than they are. Whatever you are, that is the norm. You are a human being, and you are perfect just as you are.
Absolutely.
And anybody who treats you as less than that, that's their problem. Don't take it on. Don't comply with it. Don't act like it's okay and it's acceptable. And above all, give your child the strength to stand up when someone else is acting with less than respect. But never let your child feel like they have to acquiesce to someone else's concept of who they are. So we've got to go. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook page, 3 Black Moms. Until next week, I'm Naima.
And I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Barbara. We are 3 Black Moms. Hi, I'm Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're 3 Black Moms.